The wagon wheel caught another rut, jolting Isabel Montoya hard against the wooden bench. She pressed her leather satchel tighter against her ribs, feeling the precious documents inside the land grant papers that proved her family's claim to Culebra Valley. Papers her mother had died protecting. The October sky above the Arizona Territory hung low and gray, heavy with the promise of an early storm. "How much further to Last Chance?" she asked the driver. Old Samuel Briggs, who'd been running this route for 20 years. "About 5 miles. Miss, we'll make it before dark if the weather holds." Samuel spat tobacco juice over the side. "Though I don't much like the look of them clouds." Isabel pulled her mother's blue shawl tighter around her shoulders. The wool still carried a faint scent of sage and wood smoke from their old adobe home near the Silver City mines. That home was gone now, sold to pay for her father's burial after the cave-in. All she had left was the Grant 160 acres of good grazing land with water rights, deeded to her great-grandfather when the territory still flew the Mexican flag. Thunder rumbled across the desert, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Then, without warning, the rain turned to hail, white stones the size of marbles pelting down from the angry sky. "Hold on!" Samuel shouted, whipping the horses into a faster pace. The hail struck like hammers, bouncing off the wagon boards. Isabel ducked low, protecting her head with her arms. Through the white curtain of ice, she saw them riders emerging from behind the red rocks ahead, bandanas pulled high over their faces. "Chimney crew," Samuel hissed. The outlaw gang's reputation for leaving their victims as cold as chimney stones was known throughout the territory. The lead rider fired a shot into the air. "Pull up, old man!" Samuel hauled on the reins, but the horses, panicked by the hail and gunfire, veered sharply left. The wagon tilted, teetered on 2 wheels, then crashed down the embankment toward the rushing waters of Culebra Creek. Isabel felt herself flying through the air. She hit the water hard, the cold shock driving all breath from her lungs. The current caught her skirts, dragging her down. She fought upward, breaking the surface just as another gunshot cracked through the storm. But this shot came from the ridge above. A lone figure on horseback, rifle raised, fired again. The chimney crew scattered, their horses slipping on the hail-slick rocks. Isabel struggled toward the bank, her waterlogged dress weighing her down like chains. Strong hands grabbed her arms, hauling her up onto solid ground. She looked up into the face of her rescuer, a mountain man with eyes the color of winter sage. His beard trimmed close, his expression unreadable. "Can you walk?" His voice was low, rough as sandstone. She nodded, teeth chattering. "My papers." "Later." He pulled her behind a boulder as more shots rang out. The outlaws were regrouping, but the mountain man's rifle spoke again, and Isabel saw one of them clutch his shoulder before they all wheeled their horses and disappeared into the storm. The hail was lessening now, turning back to rain. Isabel spotted her satchel caught in the wagon wreckage, half submerged in the creek. Before the mountain man could stop her, she plunged back in, grabbing the leather bag and clutching it to her chest. "Fool woman," he muttered, but he waded in after her, pulling her back to shore. "Samuel," she started. "The driver's alive, broke his leg in the fall, but he'll mend." The mountain man's eyes never left the rocks where the outlaws had vanished. "We need to move. They'll be back." He whistled, sharp and clear. A bay mare emerged from the juniper scrub, sure-footed and calm despite the chaos. The man lifted Isabel into the saddle as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. "Name's Jonah Hale," he said, guiding the horse up a narrow deer trail. "Got a cabin about a mile up. You can dry out there." "Isabel Montoya," she managed through chattering teeth. "I need to get to Last Chance. The courthouse." "Tomorrow. Nothing's open this late anyway." They'd barely crested the ridge when more riders appeared on the road below. These wore badges that glinted in the last gray light. Sheriff Cobb. Isabel recognized him. And beside him rode Silas Grigg himself, the biggest landowner in the county, the man who'd been trying to buy out every Mexican grant holder for pennies on the dollar. "Miss Montoya," Grigg called up, his voice carrying false concern. "Thank the Lord you're safe. We heard about the attack." Jonah's arms tightened slightly around her as he guided the horse. She felt the tension in his body, like a wolf scenting danger. "We've come to help," Grigg continued, riding closer. "Those outlaws are a menace. Why don't you come with us? We'll see you safely to town, and I can hold those important papers of yours in my safe. Wouldn't want them getting damaged." Isabel's fingers tightened on the wet satchel. "The papers are fine. Mr. Grigg." "Now, Miss, you're clearly shaken. Let Sheriff Cobb and me handle this properly. Those old Spanish grants can be tricky to prove. Wouldn't want anything to happen to your documents before the filing." "The lady said she's fine." Jonah spoke for the first time, his voice carrying an edge sharp as flint. Grigg's eyes narrowed, taking in the mountain man for the first time. "Don't believe we've met, friend." "No, we haven't." "Well, mister." Just passing through, Jonah touched his heels to the mare's flanks. "Evening, gentlemen." He guided the horse up the trail before Grigg could respond. Isabel heard the sheriff call something after them, but the words were lost in the wind and rain. They climbed in silence, the trail winding through stands of piñon pine and juniper. The storm was passing, leaving the air sharp with the scent of wet sage. Isabel's dress clung cold and heavy, but she barely noticed. Her mind raced with questions. How had Grigg known about the attack so quickly? Why was he so eager to take possession of her papers? Jonah's cabin appeared through the trees, a solid structure of logs and mud chinking. With smoke rising from the stone chimney, he dismounted first, then helped her down. Her legs nearly buckled, but he steadied her with a hand at her elbow. "Get inside," he said. "I'll see to the horse." The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. A single room with a stone fireplace, a rough table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner covered with a bear pelt. Isabel stood shivering by the door, unsure of the propriety of being alone in a strange man's cabin, but too cold to care much about society's rules. Jonah entered, carrying her satchel and his rifle. He set both carefully by the door, then knelt by the fireplace, adding wood to the banked coals. The flames caught quickly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "There's a shirt and trousers on that peg," he said without turning around. "They'll be too big, but they're dry. I'll wait outside." When he'd gone, Isabel peeled off her sodden dress and undergarments with numb fingers. The homespun shirt fell to her knees, and she had to roll the trouser legs several times. But they were dry and warm, smelling of wood smoke and pine resin. "Decent," she called. Jonah returned with a pot of water, which he hung over the fire. From a shelf, he produced a pottery mug and a packet of herbs. "Tea," he said. "It'll warm you." Isabel sat in one of the chairs, holding the mug with both hands, letting the heat seep into her bones. Jonah sat across from her, his rifle within easy reach. In the firelight, she could see him better-weathered face, strong hands marked by work and weather, eyes that missed nothing. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, but something in his manner spoke of hard years lived. "Why did you help me?" she asked. He shrugged. "Didn't seem right. 5 men against 1 wagon. You know who they were. The chimney crew." "I know." "And you know Grigg." His eyes met hers. "I know of him. He wants my land, all the old grant holders. He's been pushing us out, buying up the grants for nothing when people get desperate enough." Isabel set down the mug, her hands steady now. "My mother. She kept our papers safe for 20 years. Through the war, through the territory changing hands, this land is all I have left of my family." Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Grigg's got the sheriff in his pocket. Half the town council, too. You file those papers tomorrow, they might just disappear." Then what am I supposed to do? That's for you to decide. I'm just saying what is. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind had died, leaving only the drip of rain from the eaves. Isabel pulled her mother's shawl miraculously only damp around her shoulders, thinking of all the women who'd worn it before her. Strong women who'd carved out lives in this hard land, who'd held on when holding on seemed impossible. I'm filing the papers, she said. It's my land, my family's land. Jonah nodded slowly. Then I'll take you to town come morning. But you should know, he paused, choosing his words. Grigg doesn't lose easy. And those boys that jumped you today? They weren't just random outlaws. The chimney crew's been hitting every wagon carrying grant papers this past month. Funny how they always know which ones to hit. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Isabel felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. She'd suspected. Of course, the attack had been too convenient, too well timed. But hearing it confirmed made her stomach turn. You saying Grigg hired them? I'm saying nothing that could get you or me shot, just observing patterns. Jonah stood, moving to the window to peer out into the darkness. You best get some sleep. Take the bed. I'll keep watch. I couldn't. You can and you will. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Isabel wanted to protest, but exhaustion was pulling at her like quicksand. She moved to the bed, still wearing the borrowed clothes, and pulled the bear pelt over herself. It was surprisingly soft, warm as summer earth. Hey, Mr. Hale. Jonah! Jonah, why does a man who just passes through have such a nice cabin? She heard him chuckle, a sound like water over stones. Even passing through takes time. I've been passing through here for 3 years now. Running from something. Maybe, or maybe just not ready to stop running yet. Isabel closed her eyes, seeing again that moment when he'd appeared on the ridge, rifle raised like some avenging angel. A man who kept to himself, who lived alone in the mountains, but who'd risked his neck for a stranger. Thank you, she whispered. Get some sleep, Miss Montoya. Isabel. Sleep, Isabel. She drifted off to the sound of rain on the roof and the steady breathing of a man keeping watch in the darkness, her hand resting on the satchel beside the bed. Tomorrow she would face whatever Grigg threw at her. Tomorrow she would fight for her land. But tonight, for just these few hours, she was safe. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was the cry of a hawk, somewhere out in the storm-washed night, wild and free as the wind itself. Isabel woke to the smell of coffee and cornbread. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the events of yesterday crashed back the attack, the storm, the mountain man who'd saved her. She sat up, still wearing Jonah's borrowed clothes, and saw him by the fire, his back to her. Morning, he said without turning. Coffee's ready. The early light filtering through the cabin's single window was pale gold. Isabel's dress hung by the fire, still damp but wearable. She gathered it up, hesitating. I'll step out, Jonah said, already moving toward the door. When she emerged from the cabin, properly dressed though wrinkled, she found him sitting on a stump, cleaning his rifle. The morning air was crisp, washed clean by yesterday's storm. Below them, the trail wound down toward Last Chance, the town barely visible in the distance. Your feet, he said, nodding toward her boots. Let me see. They're fine. They're not. You were limping last night. Reluctantly, Isabel sat on another stump and removed her boots. Her stockings were torn, and angry blisters covered both heels. Jonah disappeared into the cabin and returned with a tin of pine pitch salve. This'll sting, then it'll help. He knelt before her, applying the salve with surprising gentleness. My mother used to make this, said it could heal anything short of a broken heart. What happened to her? Fever. Winter of 61. He wrapped her feet with clean cloth strips. Try walking now. Isabel stood, testing her weight. The pain had already lessened. "Thank you. You're quite the healer for a what is it you do exactly?" "Hunt, trap, guide when I have to." He packed away the salve. "Used to scout for the army? Don't anymore." "The war." His hand stilled. "Something like that." They shared a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee, sitting in comfortable silence. Isabel found herself studying him in the daylight, the careful way he moved, always aware of his surroundings, the deep lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sun and too many hard decisions. "Tell me about this land of yours," he said finally. "It's good land, water year-round from Culebra Creek, grass enough for cattle or sheep. My great-grandfather, he got the grant from the Mexican government in 1832, when the territory changed hands. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo said our grants would be honored." She pulled out the worn leather satchel, showing him the documents wrapped in oilcloth. "Everything's here, the original grant, the survey maps, even a translation the sisters at the convent helped me with." Jonah studied the papers with more attention than she'd expected. "You can read and write." "The sisters taught me. My mother insisted. She said education was the only weapon they couldn't take away from us." Isabel carefully rewrapped the documents. "Mr. Grigg, he's been telling people these old grants aren't valid, that we need to prove continuous occupation, improvements to the land. But it's all lies. The law is clear. The law's only as good as the men enforcing it." Jonah stood, checking the position of the sun. "We should go, but Isabel—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "When we get to town, trust nobody, not even those who seem friendly." They were saddling his mare when a voice called from the trail below. "Hello, the cabin." Jonah's hand went to his rifle. A lone rider approached a young man, maybe 25, wearing the dusty black suit of a Pinkerton detective. "Easy, friend," the rider said, hands visible. "Name's Emmett Fry. I'm looking for Miss Isabel Montoya." "And why would that be?" Jonah asked, rifle still within reach. "I've been hired to ensure her safety." Fry dismounted, keeping his movements slow, "by concerned parties who wish to see justice done regarding her land claim." Isabel stepped forward. "Hired by whom?" "I'm not at liberty to say, Miss, but I can assure you, my only interest is in seeing you safely to the courthouse." Jonah caught Isabel's eye, a slight shake of his head. Something felt wrong. Pinkerton men didn't usually work alone, and they certainly didn't appear conveniently in remote mountain cabins. "That's kind of you, Mr. Fry," Isabel said carefully. "But I already have an escort." Fry's friendly expression didn't change, but Isabel noticed his eyes flick toward the trail, as if checking for something, or someone. "I insist. Miss, these are dangerous times. Why, just yesterday, the chimney crew attacked a wagon. Terrible business." "How did you know about that?" Jonah's voice was soft, dangerous. Fry blinked. "Why? Everyone in town's talking about it." "Are they? Because last I checked, town was 5 miles away. And you came from the opposite direction." The Pinkerton's hand drifted toward his gun. Jonah was faster, his rifle coming up smooth as silk. "I think you should go, Mr. Fry." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Fry smiled, all pretense of friendliness gone. "This isn't over, Montoya. You can't fight the whole territory." He mounted and rode away, but not toward town. Instead, he headed back the way he'd come, toward the red rocks where the chimney crew had waited yesterday. "He's one of them," Isabel breathed. "Or working with them." Jonah lowered his rifle. "Change of plans. We're not taking the main trail." He led her through a maze of deer paths and dry washes, always keeping cover between them and the valley below. The sun climbed higher, baking the moisture from yesterday's storm into wisps of steam. Isabel's blue shawl grew heavy with heat, but she didn't remove it. They stopped at a hidden spring to water the horse. Jonah filled his canteen, then passed it to Isabel. "You know this country well," she observed. 3 years teaches you things." He scanned the ridgeline, never completely at ease. "During the war, I learned to read land like other men read books, where to find water, where to make camp, where to set an ambush. Which side? Does it matter, blue? Gray, we all bled red." He took back the canteen. "I came out here to forget. Turns out, the desert doesn't let you forget. Just teaches you to live with remembering." They reached the outskirts of Last Chance as the sun hit its zenith. The town sprawled along the valley floor. A collection of adobe and wood frame buildings clustered around the main street. The courthouse, a 2-story brick building that also served as the land office, stood at the far end. But something was wrong. A crowd had gathered in the square, and Isabel could see Sheriff Cobb nailing something to the public notice board. "Wait here," Jonah said, dismounting. He moved closer, keeping to the shadows, then returned with a grim expression. "What is it?" "A summons. For you. Seems Mr. Grigg filed a complaint yesterday before the attack. Claims you're trying to file fraudulent documents. You're ordered to appear before the circuit judge tomorrow to answer charges." Isabel felt the blood drain from her face. "But I haven't even filed anything yet." "That's the point. He's trying to stop you before you can—" A voice called from across the square. "Miss Montoya, there you are." An elderly woman approached, pulling a small cart loaded with goods. Isabel recognized her Nettie Hobbs, who sold produce and gossip in equal measure at the market. "Heard about your troubles, dear," Nettie said. Her weathered face creased with concern. "That Grigg, he's a devil in a clean shirt. Been spreading lies all morning about you and your family." "What kind of lies?" Nettie glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Says your grant's a forgery, that your grandfather never owned that land proper. Even saying—" She paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Saying your mother earned that paper in unsavory ways." Isabel's hands clenched. To slander her mother's memory, it was beyond bearing. "Here." Nettie pressed a wrapped bundle into Isabel's hands. "Cornbread and dried apples. You'll need your strength for what's coming." As Nettie trundled away, Jonah guided Isabel to a quiet spot behind the livery stable. "You can't appear tomorrow without a lawyer," he said. "And any lawyer in Grigg's pocket won't help you." "I have to try. If I don't appear, they'll issue a warrant." "There's one man who might help. Theodore Keeler. He's old, drinks too much, but he's honest. Lost his practice in San Antonio because he wouldn't throw a case." They found Keeler in a small office above the barber shop, surrounded by law books and empty bottles. He was thin as a scarecrow, with wild white hair and sharp blue eyes that looked younger than the rest of him. "Miss Montoya," he said after hearing her story. "I'd be honored to represent you. Can't pay me, I assume." "Not much." "Good. Grigg tried to buy me last month. I'd rather starve than take his money." He studied the documents with a practiced eye. "These are solid, very solid. But that won't matter if Judge Morrison's been bought too." "Has he?" "Hard to say. He's new, just appointed. Might still have some integrity left." Keeler corked his bottle and stood. "I'll need tonight to prepare. Can you stay out of sight until tomorrow?" "She'll stay with me," Jonah said. Keeler's eyebrows rose. "And you are?" "A friend." Well, friend, keep her safe. I have a feeling tonight's going to be eventful." As they left Keeler's office, a commotion arose from the main street. Riders were coming in hard the chimney crew, bold as brass in broad daylight, but now they wore deputy badges. Griggs made them lawmen. Jonah muttered, "This just got more complicated." They slipped away, heading for the Mexican Quarter on the edge of town. Jonah seemed to know where he was going, finally stopping at a small adobe house with a wooden cross above the door. "Father Miguel," he called softly. A priest emerged, elderly but sturdy, his face lighting up when he saw Jonah. They spoke rapidly in Spanish, too fast for Isabel to follow completely. Then the priest ushered them inside. "You'll be safe here," Father Miguel said in accented English. "Mister, Jonah helped us last winter when the well went dry. We don't forget kindness." The priest's housekeeper, a formidable woman named Rosa, took charge of Isabel, insisting she eat properly and rest. As night fell, Jonah disappeared into the darkness, saying only that he needed to check on something. He returned near midnight, slipping in quietly. Isabel was still awake, worry eating at her like acid. "What did you find?" "Griggs' men are searching every boarding house and hotel. They have orders to bring you in for protective custody." He accepted a cup of coffee from Rosa. "But I also found something interesting. There's a locked storeroom behind Griggs' office, fresh lumber inside, and surveying stakes, the kind you use to mark property lines. He's planning to resurvey the valley. With his own markers, probably move them at night, then claim the original survey was wrong." Isabel felt a cold fury building. "We need proof." "No, what you need is to stay alive long enough to file those papers." Jonah set down his cup. "Tomorrow, we get you to that hearing. Keeler will do what he can. After that, I fight for what's mine." He studied her in the candlelight. "Your mother would be proud." "You didn't know my mother." "I know you. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Outside, a coyote howled, long and mournful. Isabel pulled her blue shawl tighter, thinking of all the women who'd worn it before her, all the struggles they'd faced and overcome. "Jonah, why are you helping me really?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Finally, maybe because I'm tired of seeing good people ground down. Maybe because Grigg represents everything I came out here to escape. Or maybe," he looked at her directly, "maybe because when I saw you climb back into that creek for your papers, I knew you were someone worth helping." Rosa appeared in the doorway. "You should both rest. Tomorrow will come soon enough." As Isabel settled onto the small cot Rosa had prepared, she heard Jonah take up position by the window, rifle across his knees, standing guard again, as he had the night before, a protector who claimed he was just passing through, but who knew every trail, every hiding place, who had friends among the Mexican families and the mountain people alike. Tomorrow she would face Griggs' lies in court, but tonight, listening to Jonah's steady breathing and the distant mission bells marking the hours, she felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. Not safe. Exactly, but not alone. The desert wind whispered secrets through the shutters. And somewhere in the darkness, a hawk cried once before settling into sleep. Isabel closed her eyes, her hand resting on the satchel beside her bed, and prepared for the battle to come. The courthouse bell rang 8 times as Isabel and Jonah approached through the morning shadows. Last Chance was already stirring the merchants opening shops, women drawing water from the public well, children chasing chickens down the dusty streets. But there was a tension in the air, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Theodore Keeler met them at the side entrance, looking surprisingly sharp in a clean black suit. His eyes were clear, his white hair combed back. "Miss Montoya, good. You're early." He glanced at Jonah. "Your friend should wait outside. Judge Morrison doesn't like armed men in his courtroom." "I'll be close," Jonah said, his eyes scanning the street. Several of Griggs' newly deputized men lounged near the main entrance, trying to look casual. Inside, the courtroom was already half full. Word had spread about the Mexican girl challenging Silas Grigg, and folks had come to see the show. Isabel recognized some faces, merchants who'd bought produce from her father, miners who'd known him, but none would meet her eyes. Griggs sat at the plaintiff's table, immaculate in a gray suit, talking quietly with a Denver lawyer whose gold watch chain caught the morning light. Sheriff Cobb stood by the door, star polished bright, hand resting on his gun. "All rise." The bailiff called, the Honorable Judge Clarence Morrison presiding. Morrison was younger than Isabel expected, perhaps 40, with a soft look of a man more comfortable with books than horses. He took his seat, shuffled some papers, and peered at them through wire spectacles. "This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Grigg versus Montoya, regarding the validity of certain land documents. Mr. Whitmore, you represent the plaintiff." The Denver lawyer stood. "I do. Your Honor, we intend to show that the documents Miss Montoya claims to possess are forgeries, part of a pattern of fraud perpetrated by Mexican nationals seeking to steal American land." Isabel felt her face burn. Keeler placed a calming hand on her arm. "Mr. Keeler, you represent the defendant." "I do, Your Honor, and I move for immediate dismissal. My client hasn't even filed these documents yet. This entire proceeding is premature and prejudicial." "Motion denied," Morrison said without looking up. "Proceed, Mr. Whitmore." The next hour was a master class in legal assassination. Whitmore painted Isabel's family as opportunists, her grandfather as a collaborator with Santa Anna, her father as a drunk who'd gambled away any legitimate claim, when he suggested Isabel's mother had been of questionable moral character. Keeler objected so forcefully the judge threatened him with contempt. "Your Honor," Keeler said, struggling to control his temper, "these are slanders against the dead who cannot defend themselves. I demand, Mr. Whitmore, provide evidence for these accusations." "The evidence," Whitmore said smoothly, "is the suspicious nature of the documents themselves. No Mexican grant in this county has survived intact, yet Miss Montoya claims to have perfect papers. How convenient." "Perhaps," Keeler shot back. "Other grants were destroyed by men like Mr. Grigg, who profit from their absence." "That's enough." Morrison banged his gavel. "Mr. Keeler, another outburst and you'll be removed." Isabel watched it all with growing despair. The judge barely glanced at her documents when Keeler presented them, dismissing the original Spanish grant as foreign gibberish and the translation as unverified. During a recess, she stepped outside for air. Jonah materialized beside her. "How bad—" The judge might as well be wearing Grigg's brand. She leaned against the adobe wall, fighting tears of frustration. "They're going to rule against me before I even have a chance to file." Maybe not. Jonah's eyes were on something across the square. "See that wagon, the one with the canvas cover?" Isabel looked. It seemed ordinary enough, driven by an old Mexican man she didn't recognize. "That's Sebastian Morales. Used to ranch near your valley before Grigg burned him out. He's been asking around town about you." Before Isabel could respond, Keeler appeared. "We're resuming. And Isabel, whatever happens, don't lose your temper. That's what they want." Back inside, Whitmore called his first witness a surveyor named Platt, who swore the original Mexican surveys were notoriously inaccurate, and that modern American surveys showed the Montoya grant overlapping with lands properly claimed by Mr. Grigg. "When did you conduct these modern surveys?" Keeler asked on cross-examination. "Last month." "At night?" Platt shifted uncomfortably. "Sometimes we work when it's cooler. By lantern light must be hard to see property markers in the dark." "Objection," Whitmore called. "Counsel is badgering." Sustained. Keeler returned to his seat, but he'd made his point. Some in the gallery were whispering. The next witness was Worst Sheriff Cobb himself, testifying that the Montoya family had been suspected of various illegal activities over the years. "What illegal activities?" Keeler demanded. "Well, there were reports." "Reports? Do you have any arrests, convictions?" "No, but—" "So no actual evidence of any wrongdoing by the Montoya family." Cobb's face reddened. "Everyone knows those people." "Those people?" Keeler's voice could have etched glass. "You mean Mexican citizens who became American citizens by treaty, who've worked this land since before you were born?" Morrison gavelled them to order, but damage was done. The room had divided those nodding along with Cobb, and those shifting uncomfortably at his naked prejudice. During the lunch recess, unexpected allies appeared. Sebastian Morales approached with 2 other old ranchers, all former grant holders. "We remember your grandfather." Sebastian told Isabel, "Good man. Helped us during the drought of '58. We'll testify if the judge allows." But when court resumed, Morrison denied Keeler's request to call new witnesses. "This hearing is about documents, not character testimonials." Grigg took the stand next, playing the reasonable businessman. He spoke of his dreams for the valley, bringing prosperity and progress, hindered only by unclear titles and ancient claims. "I've made fair offers to Miss Montoya," he said, looking at her with practiced sympathy. "But she refuses to be reasonable." "What offers?" Keeler asked. $500 for her quitclaim. For 160 acres with water rights, that's insulting. It's generous for land she can't prove she owns. "Can't prove, Your Honor. I'd like to present People's Exhibit 1, a certified copy of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which specifically protects Mexican land grants." Morrison waved it away. "We're not here to relitigate the Mexican War, Counselor." The afternoon wore on, each ruling favoring Grigg. Isabel felt hope slipping away like water through her fingers. Then, just as Morrison seemed ready to rule, commotion erupted outside. Emmett Fry burst through the doors, clothes torn, face bloodied. "Your Honor, I need protection." Sheriff Cobb moved to intercept him, but Fry dodged, pulling a leather journal from his coat. "Evidence, I have evidence of conspiracy." "Arrest that man!" Grigg shouted, his composure cracking. "On what charge?" Keeler was on his feet. "Your Honor, this man clearly has information relevant to this case." Morrison hesitated. The gallery was in uproar. Some of Grigg's deputized outlaws were pushing through the crowd, hands on their guns. "I was hired by Grigg," Fry shouted over the noise, "to intimidate Mexican landholders. It's all here payments, orders, names." Cobb finally caught him, wrestling him toward the door. But old Sebastian stepped into their path, and suddenly other Mexicans in the gallery stood too, forming a human wall. "Let him speak!" someone shouted. "Order!" Morrison pounded his gavel. "Order, or I'll clear the court." In the chaos, Isabel saw Jonah slip through a side door. Where was he going? Grigg was conferring frantically with Whitmore. Cobb had released Fry but kept close, hand on his gun. The journal had disappeared into Keeler's possession. Isabel hoped. "Your Honor," Whitmore said when quiet was restored, "this disruption is clearly staged. I move for—" A new voice interrupted. "Your Honor, if I may." Everyone turned. A distinguished man in federal marshal's attire stood in the doorway. "Marshal James Crawford, from Tucson. I'm here investigating reports of land fraud in this county." Grigg went pale. Morrison looked like he'd swallowed a scorpion. "This is a local matter." The judge stammered. "Land grant disputes fall under federal jurisdiction, Your Honor, as does conspiracy to defraud the government." Crawford walked down the aisle, spurs ringing. "I'll be observing these proceedings." Isabel caught Keeler's eye. He looked as surprised as everyone else. This wasn't their doing. "Perhaps," Morrison said weakly. "We should recess until tomorrow." "No," Isabel stood, surprising herself. "Your Honor, I've been accused of fraud. I demand the right to defend myself today." The judge looked to Grigg, then to the marshal, trapped between powers. "The lady has a point," Crawford said mildly. "Justice delayed is justice denied." "Very well," Morrison sighed. "Mr. Keeler, present your defense." Keeler rose slowly, as if afraid to break whatever spell had brought the marshal. "Your Honor, I call Miss Isabel Montoya to the stand." Isabel took the oath, her hand steady on the Bible. She faced the packed courtroom hostile faces, curious faces. and a few, like Sebastian's, offering silent support. "Tell us about your land." Keeler said simply, so she did. She spoke of her great-grandfather, who'd ranched the valley when it was still Mexico, of her grandfather, who'd kept the ranch running after the war, paying taxes to the new government, honoring the new laws, of her parents, working side by side, her mother teaching the miners' children to read while her father labored underground to pay for improvements to the land. "The grant is written in Spanish," she said, "because that was the language of law when it was issued. But the seal is genuine. The signatures verified by the parish records in Santa Fe. This paper represents 4 generations of work, of hope, of belief that law means something." Pretty words. Whitmore sneered on cross-examination. "But can you prove the document isn't forged? Can you prove it is—" "I don't have to. The burden of proof is on the plaintiff in a fraud allegation," Marshal Crawford interrupted. "At least in federal court. Please continue. Miss Montoya." Isabel felt a spark of hope. "The grant describes landmarks Finger Rock, the split juniper by the Eastern Spring, the old Spanish mine, all still there. The water rights reference the acequias my great-grandfather dug. Still flowing, Mr. Grigg knows this land has been continuously occupied and improved. That's why he wants it." "Objection!" Whitmore shouted. "Speculation!" "Overruled," Morrison said weakly, wilting under Crawford's stare. The courtroom doors banged open again. Jonah entered, carrying something wrapped in canvas. Behind him came 3 cowboys Isabel recognized hands from neighboring ranches. "Your Honor," Jonah addressed the judge directly. "Evidence." He unwrapped the canvas, revealing several wooden stakes. Fresh cut but dirt-stained. "Found these in Grigg's warehouse. New survey markers. Made to look old. The boys here helped me dig up others already planted on Miss Montoya's land. Moved the boundaries near half a mile." One of the cowboys stepped forward. "I worked for Grigg until yesterday. He had us out every night, moving markers, tearing down old fences. Said it was legal-like, but—" Grigg erupted. "Lies. This saddle tramp is obviously in league with—" "Mr. Grigg," Crawford's voice cut like a blade. "You'll have your chance to respond. Under oath. In federal court." The courtroom held its breath. Morrison looked from Grigg to Crawford to the evidence Jonah had presented. "Your Honor," Keeler said quietly, "I move for dismissal of all charges against my client." Morrison's gavel fell like a gunshot. "Dismissed! Miss Montoya is free to file her land grant." He fled the bench before anyone could respond. The courtroom exploded. Grigg pushed through the crowd, Cobb and his deputized outlaws forming a protective wedge. But Marshal Crawford's steady presence kept anyone from drawing weapons. Isabel found herself surrounded by well-wishers, Sebastian and the other old ranchers, townspeople who'd been afraid to speak out before. Keeler pumped her hand, grinning like he'd shed 20 years. "Don't celebrate yet," he warned. "Grigg won't give up easy." Through the crowd, Isabel's eyes found Jonah. He stood apart, watching her with that quiet intensity. She pushed through to him. "The Marshal—" "Wasn't my doing," he said. "Sometimes the universe provides its own justice. But the evidence was, thank you." He shrugged. "You'd have won without it. Truth has a way of surfacing." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of fire. Grigg's men were mounting up, their leader's face dark with fury. As they passed, Grigg locked eyes with Isabel. "This isn't over," he said softly. "That land will be mine." "Over my dead body," she replied. His smile was cold. "If necessary." They rode off in a cloud of dust. Marshal Crawford approached, tipping his hat to Isabel. "Ma'am, I'll be in town a few days. If you have any more trouble—" He handed her a card. "Federal authority still means something out here." As the crowd dispersed, Emmett Fry emerged from wherever he'd been hiding. His face was bruised but determined. "Miss Montoya, I owe you an apology. I was hired to scare you, but—" He shrugged. "Some things a man can't stomach. That journal has enough to hang Grigg, if the marshal can make it stick." "Why the change of heart?" Fry looked uncomfortable. "My mother was Mexican, from Sonora." "Grigg doesn't know that." As night fell over Last Chance, Isabel stood with Jonah outside the courthouse. Tomorrow she would file her papers, make her claim official. But tonight, she knew Grigg was out there, planning his next move. "You should leave town," Jonah said, "until things settle." "No, I'm done running, done hiding." She pulled her mother's shawl tight. "This is my land, my home. I'll fight for it." He studied her in the lamplight. "Then you'll need more than legal papers. What do you suggest?" "Friends, allies, and maybe someone watching your back who knows how men like Grigg think." "Are you volunteering?" "Maybe I'm tired of just passing through." Above them, stars began to pierce the darkening sky. Somewhere in the desert, a coyote called to its pack. The night was full of dangers, but also possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, standing in the shadow of the courthouse where she'd won her first victory, Isabel Montoya felt something she hadn't dared feel before: hope. The rain came sudden and hard, turning the desert trail to mud within minutes. Isabel pressed herself against Jonah's back as the mare picked her way carefully through the rushing water that had been, moments before, a dry creek bed. Thunder crashed overhead, so close she could feel it in her chest. "There!" Jonah shouted over the storm, pointing to a cluster of rocks ahead. "We need to cross before it rises more." They'd left town an hour ago. Marshal Crawford's warning ringing in their ears, Grigg's men were gathering at the old Simmons ranch, planning something. Better to get Isabel's papers filed at the county seat in Prescott, where Grigg had less influence. But Cobb had anticipated this. His deputies had blocked the main road, forcing them to take the treacherous route through Culebra Valley, Isabel's own land that she couldn't yet legally claim. The water was rising fast, brown and angry with runoff from the mountains. The mare stumbled, whinnying in fear. Isabel's satchel, wrapped in oilcloth and tied to her body, felt heavier with each surge of current. "Hold tight!" Jonah fought to keep the horse steady, but the water was too strong. They went down, the shock of cold stealing Isabel's breath. The current caught her skirts, pulling her under. She struggled upward, breaking the surface, gasping. Jonah's arm came around her waist, hauling her toward the bank. They collapsed in the mud, coughing up silty water. The mare had made it across, standing dejected and dripping on higher ground. Isabel checked her satchel frantically. The oilcloth had held the papers were damp but intact. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by anger. Hot, burning rage at being driven from her own land like a criminal, forced to risk her life for documents that should mean safety, not danger. "We need shelter," Jonah said, water streaming from his beard. "No!" Isabel struggled to her feet, her wet dress clinging, heavy as chains. "I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of men like Grigg deciding whether I live or die." "Isabel." "Don't!" She rounded on him, rain mixing with tears she didn't remember starting to cry. "You want to help stop treating me like some fragile thing that needs protecting. I've buried both parents. I've kept those papers safe for 2 years while Grigg's men circled like vultures. Her voice broke. The weight of it all, the fear, the exhaustion, the constant vigilance crashed over her harder than any flood. "Why save me if my life is still not my own?" She was shaking now, from cold and fury. "Why pull me from the water just so they can drown me in their laws and lies?" Jonah stood there in the rain, watching her with those sage-colored eyes. She saw something shift in his expression, a recognition, maybe, of his own battles with fate and freedom. He moved toward her slowly, like approaching a spooked horse. "You're right." "What?" She'd expected argument. platitudes about patience and prudence. You're right. Saving someone just to watch them stay trapped, that's no kindness. He was close now. Close enough that she could see the rain droplets in his beard, the weariness around his eyes. So what do you want to do? I want... The word stuck in her throat. What did she want? Beyond keeping her land. Beyond surviving another day. I want to stop being afraid. Something changed in the air between them, electric as the lightning overhead. Jonah raised his hand slowly, giving her time to step back. When she didn't, he cupped her face, thumb brushing away rain or tears or both. Then stop, he said simply. She could have pulled away. Should have. Probably a proper lady didn't stand in storms letting strange men touch her face. But Isabel was tired of proper, tired of careful, tired of the narrow space between what she should do and what might keep her alive. She tilted her head up, the slightest nod of permission. That was all it took. His kiss was fierce as the storm, tender as the rain. Not silencing her, she realized with a start, but answering her, all her fury and fear and defiance met with understanding, with promise, with something that might have been hope. When they broke apart, she was still shaking, but not from cold. Jonah rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. What was that? She whispered. Maybe a reason to stop passing through. His voice was rough. Maybe a promise that you don't have to fight alone. Thunder rolled across the valley, but softer now, the storm beginning to move on. Isabel became aware of their position alone, soaked, improper in every way. But instead of shame, she felt something like power, choice, agency. We should find shelter, she said, not moving away from him. There's a line shack about a mile upstream. Hunters use it sometimes. He stepped back, giving her space. Can you ride? They caught the mare, who seemed grateful for human company after her ordeal. Jonah lifted Isabel into the saddle, then swung up behind her. This time, when she leaned back against him, it felt different, deliberate. The line shack was small but solid, built into a natural overhang that kept the worst of the weather off. Inside, a stone fire pit, a rough bunk with old blankets, and a cache of firewood left by previous occupants. Jonah built a fire while Isabel wrung out her hair and skirts as best she could. Steam rose from their clothes as warmth filled the small space. He hung a blanket across the middle of the shack, creating a privacy screen. You can change behind there. I'll turn my back. Isabel fingered the wet fabric of her dress. Everything she owned was soaked through. Into what? He rummaged in a pack left by hunters, producing a faded shirt and worn trousers. Not elegant, but dry. She took them gratefully, disappearing behind the blanket. As she peeled off her sodden clothes, she could hear him moving around, talking softly to the horse, maintaining the careful distance that preserved her honor even in their impossible situation. When she emerged, wearing clothes that smelled of tobacco and trail dust, she found him by the fire, also changed into dry things from the pack. He'd laid her dress near the flames to dry, handling the intimate garment with matter-of-fact practicality. Thank you, she said, settling beside him. For what nearly drowning you? For seeing me. She pulled her blue shawl miraculously, only damp around her shoulders. Not just someone to save or protect, but someone who might be worth standing beside. He added wood to the fire. In the war, I served under a captain from back east. Educated man. Quoted poetry in the trenches. He used to say the measure of a person wasn't their birth or station, but what they did when everything was taken away. What happened to him? Sharpshooter at Antietam, but his words stayed with me. Jonah looked at her directly. You've had everything taken away, family, safety, even the basic respect due any person, and you're still fighting. That's not common courage. Isabel. She felt heat in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. I don't feel courageous. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. Literally, in today's case. He smiled a real smile that transformed his weather-worn features. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain on the roof and the crack of burning pine. Isabel found herself studying his hands in the firelight, scarred and capable. Hands that had held weapons and reins and, now, her face with equal skill. "Tell me about the war," she said. "Your part in it." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I was 19 when I joined up. Thought I was fighting for something noble. Union, freedom, justice." He poked at the fire. "Turns out war doesn't care about your ideals, just how many men you can put in the ground." "Is that why you came west?" "Partly. After Appomattox, I went home to Indiana, but nothing fit anymore. I'd dream of battles, wake up reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. One day I just started walking west and didn't stop until the mountains told me I'd gone far enough." "Do you ever think about going back?" "Used to, but back to what the farm was sold. My folks dead from fever while I was playing soldier. Brothers scattered to the winds." He glanced at her. "What about you after you secure your land? What then?" Isabel pulled her knees to her chest, considering. "I used to think I'd teach, like the sisters taught me. Build a school for the miners' children. Maybe give them chances their parents never had." She smiled sadly. "Seems foolish now, with Greg ready to burn me out the minute the law allows." "Not foolish, noble." He shifted, his shoulder brushing hers. "The world needs more teachers and fewer gunmen." "The world seems to reward gunmen more." "In the short term, maybe, but bullets don't build communities. Schools do, churches, families." He paused. "Love." The word hung between them like a challenge. Isabel felt her heart racing. Remembered the kiss in the storm, fierce and tender and absolutely improper. She should be scandalized. Should put distance between them. Should... "Jonah!" She turned to face him fully. "What happens tomorrow after we file the papers? After Grigg makes his next move, do you go back to passing through?" He met her gaze steadily. "What do you want to happen?" "I asked you first." "So you did." He reached out slowly, tucking a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "I've been running for 6 years. From the war, from memory, from the possibility of caring about anything that could be lost. Then you climbed out of that wrecked wagon, clutching those papers like your life depended on them. And I thought there's someone who knows what matters, someone who won't let go." "I'm good at holding on," Isabel admitted. "Sometimes too good. My mother used to say I had the grip of a barnacle." "Nothing wrong with that. World's full of people who give up too easy." His hand was still near her face, not quite touching. "Question is, what are you willing to hold on to?" She caught his hand, lacing their fingers together. "My land, my dreams." A pause, then quieter. "Maybe you." He turned their joined hands, studying them in the firelight. "I'm not an easy man. Isabel, the war left marks that don't show. There are nights I wake up in places that aren't there, fighting enemies who've been dead a decade." "We all have ghosts." She thought of her parents, her ancestors, all the women who'd worn her blue shawl before her. Maybe it's easier to face them together. He lifted their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles. It should have felt presumptuous. Instead, it felt like a vow. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only the drip of water from the eaves. Isabel knew they should sleep tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But she was reluctant to break this moment, this unexpected peace in the heart of chaos. "You should rest," Jonah said finally. "Take the bunk. I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too." "Old habits. I don't sleep well with others around." She squeezed his hand before releasing it. "Maybe that's something else we can work on, together." As she settled onto the rough bunk, wrapped in blankets that smelled of wood smoke and wilderness. Isabel thought about the kiss in the storm, fierce and tender like the man himself. She was beginning to understand. A man who'd seen too much but still noticed beauty, who'd lost everything but still knew how to hope. Jonah. Thank you. For the kiss. For not trying to silence me. She heard him chuckle softly. Trying to silence you would be like trying to stop the rain. Futile and foolish. Some men don't see it that way. Some men are idiots. She smiled into the darkness. Tomorrow they would face Grigg and his law-twisting schemes. Tomorrow she would fight for her birthright, her future, her freedom. But tonight, she had this warmth and safety, and the knowledge that she wasn't alone, that someone saw her not as a problem to solve or a prize to win, but as herself, fierce and tender, like a kiss in a storm. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was the sound of Jonah feeding the fire, keeping watch, standing guard over her dreams as faithfully as he'd guarded her life. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the shack, a hawk cried once wild and free as hope itself. The smell of smoke woke Isabel before dawn. She bolted upright, finding Jonah already at the door, rifle in hand, through the small window. An orange glow painted the eastern sky, not sunrise, but fire. They're burning the grasslands, Jonah said grimly. Destroying the survey markers. Isabel's heart sank. Without those ancient markers, the split juniper, the carved stones her great-grandfather had placed proving her boundaries would be nearly impossible. Grigg was erasing history itself. They rode hard toward the smoke, finding chaos. Half the valley was ablaze, driven by morning winds. Cowboys from neighboring ranches were already fighting the flames, but it was clear this was no wildfire. The burn pattern was too regular, too strategic. There, Isabel pointed to a group of riders silhouetted against the flames. By the eastern spring. As they drew closer, she recognized Sheriff Cobb directing men with torches. They were pulling down fence posts, throwing them into the fire. But one figure caught her eye, old Nettie Hobbs, on foot, trying to stop them. "That's evidence," Nettie shouted, clutching a surveyor's notebook. "I seen you moving them stakes. I wrote it all down." One of Cobb's deputies backhanded her. The old woman fell hard, her head striking a rock. She didn't get up. "No," Isabel spurred forward, but Jonah caught her reins. "Wait, look." More riders approaching, but these wore no badges. Sebastian Morales led them, accompanied by other Mexican ranchers and even some white cowboys from the smaller spreads. They formed a line between the fire crew and the remaining markers. "That's enough." "Cobb," Sebastian shouted. "This is private land." "Got a court order says otherwise," Cobb replied, but his men looked nervous. They were outnumbered now. In the confusion, Isabel and Jonah reached Nettie. Blood matted her gray hair, but she was breathing. Her fingers still clutched the notebook. "Saw them. 3 nights running," Nettie whispered. "Wrote it all down. Which stakes they moved, where they put 'em." She pressed the book into Isabel's hands. "Don't let it be for nothing, girl." Jonah lifted Nettie gently, carrying her to his horse. "We need to get her to town." But as they turned to leave, Emmett Fry appeared, riding hard from the direction of town. His clothes were torn, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his left shoulder. "Miss Montoya, they're coming for you," he gasped. "Grigg's got a federal warrant, says you threatened Marshal Crawford, that you're inciting rebellion." "That's insane." "Crawford left town last night. Convenient, ain't it?" Emmett swayed in his saddle. "I tried to get the real journal to Keeler, but Grigg's men caught me, got away, but—" A rifle shot cut him off. Emmett jerked, red blooming across his chest. He toppled from his horse, landing hard in the ash-covered ground. "Emmett," Isabel dropped beside him, pressing her shawl against the wound. His eyes found hers, already glazing. "In my boot, the real accounts. Don't let Grigg, by heaven, too." His hand caught hers, squeezing weakly. Tell my mother. Tell her I tried to do right." He died with the sunrise, as the fires burned low and the smoke turned the dawn gray as grief. Isabel pulled the papers from his boot pages of meticulous records showing bribes, threats, murders credited to natural causes, names, dates, amounts. Grigg's empire of corruption laid bare. "We need to move," Jonah said urgently. More riders were approaching from town, badges glinting, guns drawn. They rode hard, Nettie barely conscious across Jonah's saddle. But instead of town, he turned toward the hidden canyons of the northern range. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere they won't think to look. Hold on." The next hours blurred together narrow trails, switchbacks that made Isabel's stomach lurch, caves that seemed to swallow sound. Finally, they emerged at a small camp hidden in a box canyon. Several families were already there, Mexican ranchers who'd been burned out. Their wagons circled like the old days. "Welcome to Freetown," Sebastian said, meeting them. "When the law fails, people make their own." They laid Nettie in one of the wagons. A Mexican woman with healer's hands tended her, clucking over the wound. "She'll live, God willing, but she needs rest." As the sun climbed higher, more refugees arrived. Cowboys who'd quit rather than burn out families. Miners who'd seen too much. Even some townspeople, including Theodore Keeler, who arrived with a wagon full of law books and determination. "If they want to abandon law," he declared, "then we'll preserve it. Every precedent, every treaty, every right they're trying to erase." A war council formed around the campfire. Maps were spread, showing Grigg's systematic campaign, every moved marker, every burned homestead, every family driven out. The pattern was clear. He wasn't just stealing land. He was erasing a people. "We could go to the territorial governor," someone suggested. "With what proof?" Sebastian asked bitterly. "They burned the markers. The witnesses are dead or scared silent." "Not all of them." Isabel produced Nettie's notebook and Emmett's papers. "We have dates, times, names, and I know where Grigg keeps his own records, that storeroom Jonah found." "It'll be guarded now," Jonah warned. "Then we create a distraction." Isabel's mind raced. "The autumn cattle drive starts in 3 days. Every hand in the valley will be moving herds. In the confusion—" "That's theft," Keeler said uncomfortably. "It makes us no better than them." "It's evidence," Isabel countered. "Evidence of crimes against dozens of families. How is recovering it theft?" The debate raged as the day wore on. Some wanted to ford up, wait for federal intervention. Others talked of armed resistance. But always, the specter of Grigg's power loomed: his money, his connections, his willingness to kill. As sunset approached, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Riders, moving fast. The camp prepared for attack, but the lead rider carried a white flag. It was Cobb himself, accompanied by just 2 deputies. He stopped at the canyon mouth, hands visible. "Come to gloat," Sebastian called down. "Come to talk," Cobb replied. "Grigg's gone too far. Even I got limits." After heated discussion, they let him approach. The sheriff looked older, worn down. "Emmett Fry's dead," Isabel said coldly. "Nettie Hobbs near killed. How many more? Sheriff—" Cobb's jaw tightened. "That wasn't supposed to happen. Grigg promised nobody would get serious hurt, just scared off." He looked around the camp. "This is getting out of hand. The territorial authorities are asking questions." "So you want to save your own skin?" Jonah observed. "Maybe, or maybe I'm tired of being Grigg's dog." Cobb removed his badge, threw it in the dirt. "I know where he keeps the real survey maps, the originals, from before the war. Been using them to know exactly where to move the markers." "Why should we trust you?" Isabel demanded. "Because in 2 days, Grigg's bringing in professional guns from Texas, not local boys playing outlaw, but real killers. He plans to wipe out this camp, blame it on Mexican raiders." Cobb met her eyes. Your name's top of the list. Miss Montoya. You and anyone helping you. Silence fell over the assembly. Finally, Keeler spoke. If you're serious about helping, prove it. Testify. On record. Under oath. If I do that, I'm dead. You're dead anyway if Grigg wins. Jonah said bluntly. Question is whether you die a lawman or a man. Cobb was quiet for a long moment. Then he bent, picked up his badge, and handed it to Isabel. Belonged to my predecessor. Honest man, till he asked too many questions about Grigg's land deals. They found him in the desert, snake bit. Funny thing, no snakes leave that kind of bullet wound. As night fell, the camp prepared. If Cobb was right, they had 2 days before professional killers arrived. 2 days to gather evidence, protect witnesses, and somehow restore law to a lawless place. Isabel sat with Nettie, who'd woken enough to sip some broth. The old woman's eyes were fierce despite her pain. Saw you kiss that mountain man, Nettie whispered with a ghost of her old gossip's grin. In the storm. Very romantic. Isabel blushed. You were watching. Girl, I've been watching this valley 40 years. Seen the Montoyas build it up. Seen vultures like Grigg try to tear it down. She gripped Isabel's hand with surprising strength. Your mama would be proud, standing up like you are. I'm scared, Isabel admitted. Good. Means you ain't stupid. But scared and brave ain't opposites. Child, they're dance partners. Nettie closed her eyes. That young man of yours, he's got the look of someone who knows the steps. Later, Isabel found Jonah on watch, silhouetted against the stars. She settled beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Cobb could be lying, he said, leading us into a trap. Maybe, but what choice do we have? Hide forever. Let Grigg erase us completely. There's always a choice. Question is whether you can live with it. He was quiet a moment. In the war, my unit was ordered to burn a valley in Virginia, deny resources to the enemy. Except the enemy was mostly women and children, trying to harvest enough to survive winter. What did you do? Followed orders, watched families stand in snow, crying as their barns burned. Told myself it was necessary. That war demanded such things. His voice was distant. Took me years to realize necessary and right aren't the same thing. Isabel took his hand. This is different. We're not attacking innocents. We're defending what's ours. I know. That's why I'm here. Why I'm staying. He turned to her. Whatever comes next, whatever Grigg throws at us, I want you to know something. What? That kiss in the storm, that was the first time in 6 years I felt like myself. Not the soldier, not the killer, not the ghost wandering the mountains. Just a man, holding on to something worth keeping. Jonah, let me finish. If things go bad, if we don't... She pressed her fingers to his lips. We will. We have to, because I have plans for after. Oh, a school. A ranch, maybe a stubborn mountain man who needs to learn that staying still doesn't mean giving up freedom. He caught her hand, kissed her palm. And maybe a fierce woman who needs to learn that accepting help doesn't mean weakness. Above them, a hawk cried in the darkness, hunting, surviving, enduring. Tomorrow would bring fire and violence. Men would die. Dreams would be tested. And the fate of a valley would hang in the balance. But tonight, 2 people who'd found each other in the storm held on, preparing for the greater tempest to come. Isabel fingered the badge Cobb had given her, thinking of the honest man who'd worn it, who'd died asking questions. Tomorrow, she'd ask her own questions, and God help anyone who didn't like the answers. The courthouse filled before dawn, people crowding in until they stood shoulder to shoulder. Word had spread through the valley like wildfire today. The Mexican girl would face Silas Grigg with evidence of his crimes. Some came to gawk, others to witness justice, and more than a few because Grigg's money no longer spent as freely with blood on it. Judge Morrison sat rigid behind his bench, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Without Marshal Crawford's presence, he'd lost his federal shield. Beside him sat a new-faced Judge William Thornberry from Tucson, brought in by territorial authorities who'd grown nervous about reports from Last Chance. Theodore Keeler stood ready, Nettie's notebook and Emmett's documents spread before him across the aisle. Griggs sat with a new lawyer from San Francisco, a sharp-faced man named Daniels who specialized in land disputes and character assassination. "This court will come to order." Morrison banged his gavel. "We are here to review evidence of alleged fraud in the matter of the Montoya land grant." "Your Honor." Daniels rose smoothly. "We move for immediate dismissal. These so-called documents were obtained illegally, and the witnesses will be heard." Judge Thornberry interrupted. His voice carried the authority Morrison's lacked. "Proceed. Mr. Keeler." Isabel took the stand first, wearing her best dress mended but clean and her mother's blue shawl. She held her head high as Keeler led her through the evidence. This notebook belonged to Mrs. Hobbs, who observed men moving survey stakes on 3 separate nights. Isabel read the entries, dates and times meticulously recorded in Nettie's cramped hand. "And these papers, recovered from Emmett Fry, show payments to the same men." "Hearsay," Daniels objected. "These witnesses conveniently cannot testify, one allegedly injured, the other dead under mysterious circumstances." "Then let's hear from someone who can testify," Keeler said. "I call former Sheriff Cobb to the stand." The courtroom erupted. Griggs' face went white, then red. He grabbed Daniels's arm, whispering furiously. Cobb entered through a side door, flanked by territorial deputies. He'd traded his sheriff's attire for a simple suit, but couldn't hide the nervous sweat on his brow. "State your name for the record." "Josiah Cobb, former sheriff of Last Chance." "Mr. Cobb, were you employed by Silas Grigg?" Cobb's Adam's apple bobbed. "I was sheriff, paid by the town." "Let me rephrase. Did you receive additional payments from Mr. Grigg?" A long pause. "Yes." "For what services?" To look the other way. Sometimes to help with evictions, moving property markers." His voice dropped. "Other things." Over the next hour, Cobb laid out Grigg's empire of corruption, the systematic theft of Mexican grants, the intimidation of families, the murders made to look like accidents. By the time he finished, the courtroom was silent as a grave. "You're saying Mr. Grigg ordered killings?" Judge Thornberry asked. "Not directly. He'd say things like, 'That problem needs solving permanent-like.' We knew what he meant." Daniels rose for cross-examination, but Grigg stood first. "This is ridiculous. The word of a disgraced lawman and a Mexican." "Sit down, Mr. Grigg," Thornberry ordered. "You'll have your chance to respond under oath." But Grigg had made a fatal mistake. His outburst had revealed what his lawyer's smooth words had hidden: raw contempt for the law itself when it didn't serve him. "Your Honor," Isabel stood suddenly. "There's one more piece of evidence." She produced a leather portfolio from her satchel. The original Spanish grant contained a second page, sealed inside the leather backing. My mother showed me before she died, made me swear to only reveal it if our claim was questioned. With steady hands, she opened the hidden compartment. Inside lay a second document, this one bearing not just Spanish seals but American ones as well. "A treaty edition," she explained. "Signed by both Mexican and American authorities in 1848, specifically protecting the Montoya grant and 6 others in the valley. Witnessed by..." She paused, reading. "Colonel James Morrison and Captain William Thornberry of the Army." Both judges leaned forward. Thornberry's eyes widened. "My grandfather." Morrison looked like he'd been struck. "Mine as well. I never knew." "Because men like Grigg made sure you didn't know," Isabel said quietly. made sure the original protections were hidden, forgotten, so they could steal what our families were promised.
"This is a forgery,"
Grigg shouted.
"It has to be."
"Then let's test it," Keeler suggested. "The seals, the ink, the paper all can be verified." But everyone could see the document was genuine. The aged paper, the faded but official seals, the careful signatures of men who'd tried to do right in the chaos of conquest. "There's more," Isabel continued. "According to this treaty edition, any attempt to fraudulently claim these protected grants is not just theft. It's violation of international treaty, a federal crime." The courtroom erupted again. Some of Grigg's hired men tried to push toward the exits, but territorial deputies blocked their way. Grigg himself sat frozen, calculating rapidly. Then smoke began seeping under the main doors.
"Fire!"
someone screamed. Chaos, people pushing, shoving, trying to escape. But when the doors burst open, it wasn't flame that entered. It was Grigg's Texas gunmen, bandanas over their faces, weapons drawn.
"Nobody move,"
their leader shouted.
"We're here for the Mexican and her papers."
But they'd underestimated the crowd. These weren't just townspeople anymore. They were citizens who'd watched corruption poison their valley for years. Sebastian Morales threw the first punch, and suddenly the courtroom was a battlefield. Jonah appeared beside Isabel, rifle in hand. The window now. They fought their way through the melee, behind them. Keeler clutched the documents, protected by a circle of Mexican ranchers. Judge Thornberry had produced a pistol from beneath his robes, standing his ground like the soldier's son he was. Glass shattered. Jonah boosted Isabel through, then followed. They landed in the alley as real flames began licking at the courthouse's wooden additions. Grigg's men had set fires to create panic. "The documents," Isabel started back.
"Keeler's got him. We need to move."
But Grigg was ahead of them, mounted, with 6 men. His urbane mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the predator beneath. "Give me the papers, girl, and I might let your man live." "The papers are evidence in federal proceedings now." Isabel stood straight despite her fear. "Destroying them would what hang me?" Grigg laughed bitterly.
"I'm already finished here, but I'll be damned if some Mexican whore takes what I built."
Jonah stepped forward, rifle rising, but Isabel caught his arm.
"No, not like this."
She faced Grigg directly. "You want the land so badly, then take it. But know this, every acre will be watered with the tears of families you destroyed. Every harvest will taste of ash. You'll own dirt, nothing more." Pretty words from a dead woman. Maybe. But I've already won. She smiled sadly. "Those papers are copied, sealed, sent to Washington. The truth is out. You can kill me, but you can't kill what I've proven, that this land belongs to those who worked it, not those who stole it." Grigg raised his gun. Time slowed. Isabel saw Jonah moving. Too late. Saw the flame from the barrel. Felt. The shot came from behind Grigg. He jerked, gun flying from his hand. One of his own men, Miguel Santos. She recognized with shock, lowered his smoking rifle. "My grandmother was a Montoya," Santos said quietly. "From the Sonora branch. I took your money, Grigg, but I won't take your sins." The other gunman wavered, suddenly uncertain. In that moment of confusion, territorial deputies flooded the alley. Judge Thornberry had sent them around back while the fight raged inside. "Silas Grigg, you're under arrest for violation of federal treaty, conspiracy, murder, and treason against the territory of Arizona." Grigg tried to run. Jonah's rifle butt caught him behind the knee, dropping him into the dirt. The man who'd ruled through fear now cowered in it, all power stripped away. As deputies hauled Grigg away, the fire brigade arrived. The courthouse would survive scorched but standing, like the truth itself. People emerged, some bloodied but most walking tall. The Texas gunmen were rounded up, though Santos was quietly allowed to slip away. Miss Montoya Keeler emerged, clothes singed but triumphant. documents safe in his arms. "We did it. Thornberry's already wiring the federal authorities. Every stolen grant will be reviewed, every family compensated." But Isabel barely heard him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her shaky. Jonah's arm came around her, steady as stone. "It's over," he said quietly. "No." She leaned into him. "It's just beginning. Now comes the hard part, rebuilding what they destroyed." As the sun climbed higher, washing away the smoke, people began to gather in the square. Mexican families who'd hidden for years. Cowboys who'd lost jobs rather than participate in theft. Townspeople who'd kept silent from fear. Old Sebastian brought out his guitar. Someone else produced a fiddle. Music rose, not celebration yet, but hope, the sound of a community remembering itself. Judge Thornberry approached Isabel, Morrison trailing behind, looking chastened. "Miss Montoya, the court will need your testimony for the federal case. But I want to say personally, what you did today took tremendous courage." "Not just me," Isabel gestured to the crowd. "All of us, together." "Indeed. And I think my grandfather would be pleased to know his promise was finally kept." He produced an official seal. "Your land grant has been verified and recorded. Congratulations. You are now the legal owner of 160 acres in Culebra Valley." Isabel took the sealed document with shaking hands. 4 generations of struggle ended with a piece of paper and a judge's words. Her mother would have cried. Her father would have opened his best whiskey. Her ancestors would have danced until dawn. "What will you do now?" Morrison asked, perhaps hoping for forgiveness for his earlier bias. Isabel looked at Jonah, who nodded slightly. "First, bury our dead properly. Emmett Fry saved us all. He deserves honors. Then," she smiled, "then we build schools, wells, homes. We make this valley what it should have been all along, a place where anyone can make an honest life. And Grigg will face federal justice, though I suspect prison walls won't hold him as tight as the knowledge that he lost, that the people he despised took back what was theirs through law, not violence." As the day wore on, the stories came out. Each moved marker remembered and mapped. Each threatened family naming names. By sunset, the federal prosecutor from Tucson had enough evidence to hang Grigg's entire organization. But in the square, there was no talk of hanging. Instead, there was planning. Which families would return to which lands? How to share water rights fairly? Whether the school should be adobe or wood frame. "You did this," Jonah told Isabel as they watched children play where gunmen had stood hours before. "We did this," she corrected. "All of us who refused to give up." He pulled her close as the evening star appeared. "So what now, Miss Landowner? You've got your dirt, your justice, your future. What else could you want?" She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "A partner. Someone to help me work that land. Someone who knows that freedom isn't about running, it's about having something worth staying for." "That sounds like a proposal." "Maybe it is." He kissed her then, there in the square with half the town watching, not fierce like the storm, but deep and sure and permanent as the mountains themselves. When they broke apart, Nettie Hobbs was watching from her wagon, bandaged but grinning. "About time," she called. "I was starting to think I'd have to lock you two in a root cellar." Laughter rippled through the crowd. As stars filled the desert sky, Isabel Montoya stood with her people, her land secured, her future bright, and her hand in that of a man who'd learned that some things were worth stopping for. Tomorrow there would be work endless, back-breaking work of rebuilding. But tonight, there was music and hope and the knowledge that justice, however delayed, had finally come to Culebra Valley. And somewhere in the darkness, a hawk cried not hunting now, but calling to its mate, free as the wind, but choosing to stay. 6 months after the trial, Culebra Valley bloomed with new life, where fire had scorched the earth. Spring grass grew thick and green. The old boundary markers had been restored. each one blessed by Father Miguel and witnessed by both Mexican and American families. But it was the human changes that mattered most. Isabel stood at the rise overlooking her land, watching Jonah and a crew of men working on the frame of what would be the valley's first school. The building rose from the earth like hope itself, solid timber posts, adobe walls already shoulder high, space for 3 classrooms and a small library. Never thought I'd see the day, Sebastian Morales said, joining her. He'd been elected the valley's first Mexican-American Justice of the Peace, a position that would have been unthinkable under Grig's rule. Your mother would be proud, mija. She always said education was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen. Isabel adjusted her blue shawl against the morning chill. Now every child in the valley will have that chance. Below them, wagons arrived with more supplies. The school project had become a community effort, ranchers donating lumber, miners contributing labor on their off days, townswomen organizing fundraising socials. Even some of Grig's former employees had stayed to help rebuild what they'd helped destroy. Letter for you, Miss Montoya. Young Tom Martinez rode up, proud in his new position as postal carrier. The federal government had finally established a proper post office in Last Chance. Recognition that the town was more than a lawless way station. Isabel opened the envelope, scanning its contents with growing excitement. It's from Sister Maria at the convent. She's accepted my offer to come teach. She'll arrive next month with books and supplies. A real teacher, Sebastian marveled. My grandchildren will learn to read and write proper, both languages. That had been one of Isabel's conditions. The school would teach in English and Spanish, both, honoring the valley's heritage while preparing its children for the future. Judge Thornbury had not only approved but secured territorial funding for bilingual education. A different kind of commotion drew their attention. A lone rider approached from the east, slumped in his saddle. As he drew closer, Isabel recognized Sheriff Cobb, or rather, former Sheriff Cobb. He'd been released from territorial prison after testifying against Grig, but banishment from any law enforcement position had left him adrift. Miss Montoya, he said, removing his hat. His time in prison had aged him, gray threading through his hair. I heard you were hiring hands for the ranch. You're asking me for work. Isabel couldn't hide her surprise. I'm asking for a chance to make amends. He met her eyes steadily. I know what I did. No, I can't undo it. But I also know cattle and horses, and I work hard. You'd get an honest day's labor for honest pay. Isabel studied him, remembering the fear he'd caused, the families he'd helped destroy. But she also remembered him standing in that courtroom, telling the truth when lies would have been safer. Talk to Jonah, she said finally. He's the one you'd be working under, but Cobb, one condition. You tell your story to anyone who asks, especially the children. They need to know how easy it is to trade integrity for comfort, and how hard it is to buy it back. He nodded, throat working. Yes, ma'am, thank you. As he rode toward the construction site, Sebastian shook his head. You've got your mother's heart, giving chances like that. Everyone deserves the opportunity to choose better, Isabel replied. That's what this valley is about now, second chances. The sound of hammering stopped as noon approached. Workers gathered under the cottonwoods for lunch, sharing food and water without regard to skin color or past allegiances. Isabel made her way down to join them, finding Jonah deep in discussion with the Apache crew leader about roof design. The pitch needs to handle snow load, Jonah was saying, sketching in the dirt, but also shed monsoon rain quick. Like this, Red Crow suggested, adjusting the angle. My people build for both seasons. It still amazed Isabel sometimes, seeing Jonah like this, not the solitary mountain man, but a leader, someone others looked to for guidance. The war wounds were still there, showing in his occasional distant stares and restless nights. But purpose had given him peace that wandering never could. Lunch. She offered him a wrapped bundle of tamales, courtesy of Rosa's kitchen. In a moment, he caught her hand, studying her face with concern. "You look tired, still having those morning spells." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Not spells, a blessing. Nettie Hobbs confirmed it yesterday. We'll have a harvest of a different kind come winter." Jonah's face transformed, joy and terror warring in his expression. "A baby, you're certain?" "Very certain. Nettie's delivered half the valley's children. She knows the signs." He pulled her close, mindless of their audience. "Isabel, we should marry, proper, soon." She laughed against his chest. "Is that your idea of a romantic proposal?" "I'm out of practice with romance. But I mean it. Your child should have a father's name. Legal protection." "Our child," she corrected. "And yes, Jonah Hale. I'll marry you, though not for legal protection." "No!" "For love, the rest is just paperwork." Their announcement at lunch sparked celebration. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon the worksite had transformed into an impromptu fiesta. Even Cobb, still uncertain of his welcome, was pulled into the dancing. But the celebration was interrupted by approaching riders, a full dozen, moving with military precision. Isabel tensed until she recognized the lead figure, Marshal Crawford, returned from Washington. Miss Montoya, Mr. Hale. Crawford dismounted. "All business. Congratulations are in order, I hear, both for your land victory and your upcoming nuptials." "Thank you. Marshal, what brings you back to the valley?" "Unfinished business." He produced a thick envelope. "Grigg was convicted on all federal charges. He'll spend the next 20 years breaking rocks at Yuma, but during the trial, something interesting emerged." He handed Isabel the envelope. Inside were deeds, certificates, and a banker's draft for a stunning amount. Grigg had secret partners back east. Crawford explained, railroad men who were funding his land grab in exchange for future right-of-way. When the scheme collapsed, they wanted to distance themselves. They're offering to buy out all contested claims at fair market value, 10 times what Grigg offered. "Blood money," someone spat. "Or funding for the future." Crawford countered, "Miss Montoya, as the primary victim and witness, you'd receive the largest settlement, enough to build 10 schools, maybe bring in a doctor, establish a proper bank, set up agricultural loans for returning families." Isabel looked at the papers, thinking of all that money could do. Then she looked at the half-built school, the gathered community, the life they were already building with sweat and hope. "I'll take it," she decided. "But with conditions. The money goes into a community trust. Every family harmed by Grigg's schemes gets a share. The rest funds valley improvement, schools, wells, roads, things that benefit everyone." "You could be rich," Crawford pointed out, "comfortable for life." "I am rich." She gestured to the people around her, to Jonah, to the land stretching green and promising in every direction. Comfort built on others' suffering isn't comfort at all. The marshal smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say that. I'll need a board of trustees to oversee the funds. Perhaps Mr. Morales, yourself, a few others of good standing." As they discussed details, Isabel noticed activity near the eastern spring. A family had arrived with wagons loaded with possessions, the Yamadas, Japanese immigrants who'd been farming further south until drought drove them out. Some of the workers muttered, suspicious of the newcomers. But Isabel walked over, Jonah beside her. "Welcome to Culebra Valley," she said in careful English. "Are you looking for land?" "Mr. Yamada bowed slightly. "We hear this valley welcomes those willing to work. We have little money but much experience with dry land farming." "Then you're exactly what we need." Isabel pointed to a section near the creek. 20 acres there, if you're interested. We'll work out fair terms. The soil's good, and you'd have water rights." "But we are Mrs." Yamada hesitated. "Different." "So were my ancestors when they came here." Isabel replied, "So are the Apache, the African freedmen, the Irish miners, different threads, but we're weaving something new. Will you add your thread to our fabric?" The Yamadas exchanged glances, hope dawning on their weathered faces. "Yes, with gratitude." As the afternoon wore on, the school's frame rose higher. Isabel found herself pulled into a dozen conversations about seed varieties with the Yamadas, the construction techniques with Red Crow, the curriculum with mothers eager for their children's education. Nettie Hobbs arrived in her wagon, moving slowly but determinedly. She'd recovered from her injuries but bore the scars of permanent limp, headaches that came with weather changes. The community had voted to pension her as official Valley historian, tasked with recording the stories that might otherwise be lost. "Brought something for you," Nettie said, producing a wrapped bundle. Inside was a wedding dress, simple but beautiful. White cotton embroidered with blue flowers. "Was my daughter's. She'd have wanted it used for happiness." Isabel's eyes misted. Nettie's daughter had died of fever years ago, before she could wear the dress. "Nettie, I couldn't—" "You can and you will. No arguments. Besides," her eyes twinkled, "it'll need letting out soon enough, what with that baby growing." As sunset approached, painting the mountains crimson and gold, the workers began packing up. The school frame stood complete, ready for walls and roof. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges. The railroad was still coming, bringing change both good and ill. There would be disputes over water, conflicts between old ways and new, the eternal struggle to balance growth with tradition. But tonight, as families gathered for supper and stories, as children played between languages and cultures, as former enemies worked side by side, the valley felt unified in purpose. Jonah found Isabel by the spring, watching the last light fade from the peaks. "Regrets?" he asked, settling beside her on the grass. "About what?" "The money. You could have been a wealthy woman." "I am wealthy." She leaned into him. "I have a land that's truly mine, a community that stands together, a school rising from the ashes, a man who sees me as a partner, and," she placed his hand on her stomach, "a future growing inside me. What more could I want?" "A proper house might be nice," he said dryly. "Unless you plan to birth our child in that line shack." "Already solved. The Delgado family is moving back to their original claim. They've offered us their cabin here. It's small but sound. We can add on as needed. As our family grows." "Families," she corrected. "Ours and the valley's. They're inseparable now." A hawk circled overhead, riding the last thermals of the day. Not hunting, just soaring for the joy of it. Free to fly, choosing to stay. "I love you," Jonah said quietly. "Have since you climbed into that freezing creek for those papers. Maybe before. I love you too, even if you did take your time saying it. I'm a cautious man, but once I commit," he pulled her closer. "I'm here, Isabel, for all of it. The school, the ranch, the baby, the 100 daily battles to build something lasting. No more passing through." "Good, because tomorrow we need to start planning the wedding, and the harvest festival, and the winter preparations, and—" He silenced her with a kiss, soft and sure in the gathering darkness. When they broke apart, stars were beginning to pierce the sky. "One day at a time," he murmured. "That's how we build a life. One day, one choice, one act of faith at a time." They sat together as night claimed the valley, listening to the sounds of their community laughter from the Morales house, singing from the freedmen's camp, the soft murmur of evening prayers in multiple languages, all the voices of Culebra Valley, distinct but harmonizing, creating something new from ancient soil. Tomorrow there would be a school to build, a wedding to plan, a future to shape. But tonight, Isabel Montoya sat with the man she loved, their child growing beneath her heart, on land that was finally, truly, legally hers. The fight for justice had been won not with guns, but with courage, not through violence, but through community, not by one person's strength, but by many people choosing to stand together. And in that choice, repeated daily, lay the real victory, not just papers or property, but the proof that different people could build something together that none could build alone. That was the true inheritance, not just land, but the knowledge that justice, though delayed, would not be denied to those with the courage to claim it. 3 years later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across Culebra Valley School as children spilled out for recess. Their laughter echoed off the adobe walls, a sound that never failed to make Isabel smile. She stood in the doorway of the main classroom. One hand resting on her swollen belly, their second child would arrive before winter's end. "Mama, look!" 3-year-old Anna Hale ran toward her, braids flying, clutching a paper covered in careful letters. "I wrote my name. Miss Maria says I write better than the big kids." Isabel knelt carefully, examining her daughter's work. Anna had her father's steady hand and her mother's determination, a formidable combination. "Beautiful work. Mia, your papa will be so proud."
Where is Papa?
Anna's gray-green eyes, Jonah's eyes, and Isabel's face scanned the horizon. "Leading the forest survey team. He'll be home by supper." Isabel smoothed her daughter's hair. "Why don't you show your writing to Grandmother Nettie? She's in the library." As Anna raced off, Sister Maria emerged from the adobe building, wiping chalk dust from her hands. The nun had adapted to frontier life with surprising ease, trading her convent's quiet halls for a classroom full of energetic children from a dozen different backgrounds. 28 students today, Maria reported with satisfaction. The Yamada twins are progressing beautifully in English, and young Tom Martinez is ready for advanced mathematics. And the new family from Oklahoma, the Patterson children, are settling in. The older boy had some words about learning alongside Mexican children, but Pedro Morales set him straight. Maria smiled. "Nothing teaches tolerance quite like being outrun and outscored by those you claimed were inferior." The school had become more than Isabel had dared dream. 3 classrooms, a library with books in 4 languages, and plans for a secondary program next year. The territorial government had begun sending other districts to observe their bilingual education model. A dust cloud on the eastern road announced visitors. Isabel shaded her eyes, recognizing the lead rider's distinctive posture. Jonah had returned early, and he wasn't alone. Behind him rode 6 men in the new Forest Service uniform, and with them, a familiar figure, Theodore Keeler, now a territorial judge, his wild white hair somewhat tamed beneath a proper hat. Isabel Keeler dismounted with surprising agility for his age. "Good news from Prescott. The territorial legislature has approved funding for a medical clinic. They're sending a young fellow named Harrison and a trained nurse." "That's wonderful. Where will we put them?" "That's where I come in," Jonas said, swinging down from his horse. He kissed Isabel's cheek, then rested his hand briefly on her belly, checking as he always did. "The Forest Service wants to establish a ranger station here in the valley. They'll provide materials and labor. We build their station. They help us build the clinic." The partnership made sense. As the territory developed, the need for managed forestry had become clear. Jonah's knowledge of the mountains, combined with his newfound stability, had made him the natural choice for head ranger. "There's more," Keeler continued. "The railroad's definitely coming through, but not as Grigg planned. They're routing through the northern pass, leaving the valley's heart untouched. There'll be a depot at last chance, bringing trade without destroying the land." Isabel felt tears prick her eyes. Pregnancy always made her emotional, but this was genuine joy. Every piece of progress felt like validation of their struggle, proof that fighting for justice had been worth the cost. "Papa," Anna's voice carried across the schoolyard. She ran full tilt into Jonah's arms, chattering about her day. He listened with grave attention, examining her writing as if it were a crucial treaty. "Shall we tell them about the letter?" Keeler asked, eyes twinkling. Jonah nodded, producing an official-looking envelope. "From Washington. The Department of Interior is creating a new program, land grants for agricultural education. They want to establish an experimental farm here, testing crops suitable for high desert cultivation. Run by, Isabel asked, though she suspected the answer. The Yamada family, in partnership with the school. Toshi's dry farming techniques have tripled yield per acre. Washington wants to learn what he knows. As if summoned by his name, Toshi Yamada appeared with Sebastian Morales, deep in discussion about the upcoming harvest. The two men had become unlikely friends, bonding over their shared love of the land and their determination to prove that different cultures could strengthen rather than divide a community. Mrs. Hale. Toshi bowed slightly. The corn varieties we discussed are showing great promise. With selective breeding, we could develop strains that need half the water of traditional crops. Imagine, Sebastian added, feeding twice as many families with the same resources. That's the future we're building. The afternoon wore on with planning and discussion. Where to site the clinic, how to integrate the experimental farm with the school curriculum, which families might be interested in the forest service jobs. Isabel found herself at the center of it all, translating between languages and perspectives, weaving individual threads into community fabric. As the sun began its descent, painting the mountains in shades of copper and rose, the daily transformation began. Workers became musicians, mothers became dancers, and the schoolyard became a plaza. It had started spontaneously in the months after Grigg's defeat, people gathering to share food and stories, to celebrate survival and plan for tomorrow. Now it was tradition, as essential to valley life as water or soil. Isabel sat with the other women, hands busy with sewing while keeping one eye on the children. Her pregnancy limited her dancing, but not her participation. Beside her, Nettie Hobbs worked on her chronicle, recording the day's events in careful script. For posterity, Nettie explained, though everyone knew she just couldn't stop collecting stories. Her official history of the valley was nearly complete, a document that would preserve not just facts, but the spirit of their transformation. Mrs. Hale, a young voice interrupted. Isabel looked up to see Sally Patterson, the Oklahoma girl who'd arrived suspicious and scared. My PA says we're staying permanent. Says this is the first place he's felt honest work gets honest reward. I'm glad, Isabel said warmly. The valley needs families like yours. I wanted to say, Sally struggled with words. I'm sorry for what my brother said about learning with Mexican kids. He knows better now. We all learn. Isabel replied, that's why we have schools. As full darkness fell, lanterns were lit, casting warm pools of light. Jonah found Isabel, settling beside her with Anna drowsing in his arms. Tired, he asked. The good kind, the kind that comes from building rather than fighting. Speaking of building, I've been thinking about our house. With another little one coming, we'll need more room. Already planned. The Delgado's nephew is a fine carpenter. He'll start the addition next month. You think of everything. I try. Someone has to keep you forest wanderers civilized. He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. 3 years ago, you were the one needing rescuing from civilization. 3 years ago, we were different people. She leaned into him, careful of Anna. Scared, angry, alone. Now look at us. Now look at us, he agreed. The music shifted to something slower. Older, a Mexican lullaby that Isabel remembered her mother singing. Across the plaza, she could see the fruits of their labor. The school, solid and welcoming. The well-maintained roads connecting previously isolated families. The telegraph lines bringing news from the wider world. Gardens growing where dust had ruled. But more than physical changes, she saw the human ones, former enemies working together, children playing without regard to the divisions that had consumed their parents, knowledge being shared across cultural lines, justice not as an abstract concept but as daily practice. Mama, Anna stirred, blinking sleepily.
Tell the story.
Which story? Mi amor. About the storm, and Papa, and the kiss. Isabel blushed, while Jonah grinned. Anna had overheard some version of their courtship, probably from Nettie, and demanded it as a bedtime story with increasing frequency. Once upon a time, Isabel began, there was a woman with important papers and a man who lived in the mountains. She told it simply, safely, turning their desperate flight into an adventure, their conflicts into challenges overcome by cleverness rather than violence. In Anna's version, the kiss was because they were happy, not desperate. The baby was young to understand the harder truths that sometimes people had to fight for justice, that hatred could poison whole communities, that love could bloom in the rockiest soil. Those lessons would come later, illustrated by the community around her. For now, it was enough that she grew up surrounded by proof that different people could build something beautiful together. As the evening wound down, families began drifting home, the Yamadas to their thriving farm, the Morales clan to their restored ranch, the freedmen to their settlement by the western spring, where they'd built a church that welcomed all faiths, each group maintaining their identity while contributing to the whole. Time for bed, little one, Jonah said, lifting Anna easily despite her sleepy protests. They walked home along the creek path, the water murmuring its eternal song. The cabin had grown with their family 2 bedrooms now, with plans for a third. A proper kitchen where Isabel could host the planning meetings that shaped valley policy. A porch where Jonah could sit and watch the mountains without feeling the old urge to disappear into them. As they tucked Anna into bed, she demanded one more telling of the kiss story, then fell asleep mid-sentence. Isabel and Jonah stood watching her, marveling as parents do at the miracle of their creation. Later, on the porch, they sat together watching stars wheel overhead. The hawk that had become their unofficial guardian circled once, a shadow against shadow, before settling into its nest in the great cottonwood. Any regrets? Jonah asked. Their old ritual?
Never,
Isabel answered, meaning it.
You? Only that it took me so long to stop running.
He pulled her close. Though if I hadn't been passing through at just the right moment. Fate, she said. Choice, he countered. 1,000 small choices that led us here. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The desert song, as old as the stones, as new as tomorrow's sunrise. Isabel thought of all those who'd stood on this land before her ancestors, the native peoples before them, all the generations stretching back to the beginning of memory. Each had faced their trials, made their choices, left their mark. Now it was her turn, their turn, not just to hold the land but to help it flourish, not just to preserve the past but to build the future, not just to survive but to thrive. Creating a place where Anna and her sibling and all the valley's children could grow up knowing that justice was possible, that different people could live in harmony, that love could indeed conquer hate. What are you thinking? Jonah asked. About tomorrow. Parent meetings at the school, the clinic groundbreaking. 3 families arriving from Sonora that need housing assistance. The Autumn Festival Planning Committee. I meant, what are you thinking about right now? This moment. She turned in his arms, smiling. I'm thinking that I'm home. We're home. And that's everything. Above them, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs. But below, in the valleys and mountains of the Arizona territory, people were writing new stories on ancient pages, stories of courage and community, of justice delayed but not denied, of love that crossed all boundaries. And in one small cabin by Culebra Creek, a former mountain man and the daughter of Mexican miners held each other close, their love a bridge between worlds, their children the promise that the future could be different from the past. The desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere, a mockingbird began its night song, not one melody, but many, woven together into something entirely new. Like the valley itself, like the life Isabel and Jonah had built from storm and struggle. No longer passing through, finally, forever, home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Tales, like this video, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means everything